Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction, except, not including, except, other than, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted and shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Therefore, slavery still exists in the United States of America. I bring to you this afternoon Mr. Dennis Febo, who is a change agent working to make that amendment change those words. Brooklyn native Mr. Dennis Febo was raised in various parts of the United States and Puerto Rico. Growing up in such diverse and different communities and having experience with poverty and racism and prejudice gave him a very unique outlook on life. As a teenager, he took on the goal of uplifting human beings to enact their true potential through education and social consciousness along with culture. While in high school and college, he began many different organizations, many different organizing projects, mainly targeting youth with whom he found so much in common, all coming from disadvantaged communities. After college, he began taking action through community organizing and realized his speaking abilities coming from his evangelical background. Mr. Febo is a graduate of the University of Buffalo, and he holds his master's degree in humanities and interdisciplinary studies, and he's had the opportunity to study in Havana, Cuba, and Bahia, Brazil. I welcome you today, Mr. Dennis Febo, who's going to water our seeds and help continue with today's theme and help us to continue to grow.
Thank you so much, Kia, for that introduction. Powerful Queen, bless you. Thank you, Fight Philadelphia, for organizing this and attempting during these times to still educate the community via whatever means we have necessary. Again, my name is Dennis Febo. I'm the founder and CEO of Guasabara Insights, which means Warrior Insights, LLC, which is a health and education services provider whose goal is to raise social consciousness and uplift our community. And we do so through the dissemination of our cultural and social conscious education. We have been doing so working with our most disadvantaged, which is our incarcerated population here in New Jersey, specifically Hudson County, New Jersey, where in the past 7 years we worked with thousands of incarcerated community members inside of our county facility, as well as working with our juvenile detainees who are pretty much found all over the state of New Jersey. Because I've been in there 7 years, I've been able to work inside of a facility, engage with so many different people, engage with the administration, the people who pass legislation. I got pretty good inside look to me, and I felt like something more needed to be done, not just here in New Jersey, because we know and understand that poverty and the conditions of how most people, communities of color and impoverished communities live around the country are very similar. We know that mass incarceration is a problem in our country, and I basically wanted to do something about it. So as of 2 years ago, we have the Amend the 13th New Jersey movement. And the reason we picked amending the 13th Amendment, first, in blessings to Ava DuVernay's documentary, The 13th. If you haven't watched it, it's on Netflix and on YouTube for free. And here there's a pretty good breakdown in the understanding of how mass incarceration came to be in the United States of America and why it disproportionately affects men and women of color throughout the country. From that documentary and just from my own personal study, I decided that if we knew and understood that the United States was only one of the few countries in the world that still had slavery language included into its constitution, that something needed to be done about it. We're going to say we're the land of the free and the home of the brave. In the land of the free, there should be no language that delineates any conditions of the status of slavery. All right. So Amendment 13th is New Jersey-based. Amending the 13th Amendment is only a state-based concept. I want to make that clear. The federal 13th Amendment is a repeal and replace movement. It is supposed to be introduced by Senator Merkley coming out of Oregon. And in here, we will repeal the 13th Amendment and replace it with what would be the 28th, which would state slavery and involuntary servitude are illegal in the United States and all of its jurisdictions. There's no exception. New Jersey, along with many other states, when in the middle of our campaign, we found out that Colorado in 2018, in their November vote, they were able to successfully amend their state constitution to completely abolishing slavery in all of its conditions. Because of that, a group of us here from New Jersey flew out to Colorado to meet the brothers and sisters over there of all colors, genders, shades, and sexualities who came together and decided that, first and foremost, as a moral concept, an ethical concept, not necessarily having to get down into breaking down the innuendos of what the 13th Amendment created in our society, but just on the premise alone that slavery should just be illegal, period, no matter what. All right. And because of the efforts of us coming together with Colorado, other states started to express interest. As of August 28th of this year, we all came together and we formalized the Abolish Slavery National Network. We have 2 states that are going up on the ballot this November, which are the states of Utah and Nebraska. New Jersey was supposed to be on the ballot, but there was a technical error on behalf of the legislators. Therefore, our ballot question is getting pushed to November of next year. A whole lot of other states are at the table, with a lot of people expressing interest and wanting to do the same. We know that in order to change the 13th Amendment at the federal level, we need to get the buy-in from the states. And because each state functions as its own independent entity, each state has the right to incorporate anti-slavery language into their state constitution. All right. So before we go into that, I want to go a little bit into the history of the 13th Amendment, just because I want the viewer to understand the philosophical and the moral stances that were being considered at the time, and why those intersect with what we believe today, and how those reflect within the data that's shown in regards to mass incarceration. So next slide, please. The one before, yep. The little graph. So this has been a popular graph that's been circulating social media, and I think it does a fair job in trying to kind of explain what African descended people or melanated people had to endure in U.S. history. And just to be clear, U.S. history is a very young history compared to many other nations and countries in the world. And for the youth and the infancy of this country, most of it was ingrained into the concept of slavery. For most of its existence, the United States has had slavery. We know that, and we hear that in 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. And we found out that it didn't took some soldiers to go down into Texas to remind everyone else that slaves had been freed. Here, what we call the concept of chattel slavery, or that a human being were to be owned and can be put into a field and made to work for profit, right? And we know that this is what sustained the economy of the United States and the economy of many of the states that solely depended on free labor. That the United States would not be where it's at today, economically speaking, if it wasn't for those centuries of free labor. 1865 comes along and the 13th Amendment is passed, something that President Lincoln was completely bent on making sure that it passed. He was obsessed with making sure that slaves were freed. However, there was a language in there, and I want you to, first off, we go to the next slide, reiterate the purpose of the Civil War. The Civil War was a war fought on the basis of North versus South, and the South's need to want to maintain their economic independence through free labor. The North understood that if they can eliminate the economic bastion of slavery in the South, they could finally put the South and defeat them and bring them back under the Union. But it wasn't going to be easy to convince a bunch of states who depended on slave labor to eliminate slavery. So many of them incorporated what was called gradual emancipation. Gradual emancipation. And that meant that if we did it little by little, it wouldn't hurt so much as getting rid of it completely. And in such process, and this is where Philadelphia comes into place, or Pennsylvania. 13th Amendment, as Pennsylvania being a Democratic state at the time, it was those congressmen from Pennsylvania who sided with the abolitionists and tipped the hat over to make sure that the 13th Amendment passed. Now, in such amendment, they wanted to insert what was called the convict clause. All right. So if you go to slide 5, please. The abolitionist movement was a very, very powerful movement in the United States of America. The question of the morality and the legality of slavery has always permeated our conversations. It is understood by the founders of this country and the people that wanted to drive the philosophy that human beings stand in what's called natural law. Natural law meaning that we stand as sons and daughters of God, right, with all the laws endowed or the rights endowed upon us by God. The right to breathe, eat, sleep, believe what you believe, practice what you preach, as long as you're not hurting anyone else. And during that time, we knew that in order for one human being, I'm going to argue psychologically speaking, for a human being to subjugate another human being to do their bidding, no matter what is said, something inherently evil exists in that construct, right? And it goes against the morals and the principles of what was and is still today a Judeo-Christian society. A very famous senator, Charles Sumner, as part of the abolitionist movement, was one of the first people to start fighting, even though Vermont was the first state to incorporate the exception clause, that the exception clause should not have been included in what was the emancipation of slavery. What I think is funny is that all the way back then, 150 something years ago, people were having the same exact conversation we're having right now, whether or not an exception to any rule of slavery should exist. In his book, Slaves of the State, Black Incarceration, From the Chain Gang to the Penitentiary, Sumner argues that the exception was a loophole to reestablish slavery by another name. He wanted the 13th Amendment to state that all persons are equal before the law. Another interesting thing that I learned today while trying to add a little more research to this presentation was that Thomas Jefferson was actually the first person, one of the first legislators during the foundation of the country to introduce anti-slavery language, even though it did not go through the original signature of the Declaration of Independence, which was funny because we all know that Thomas Jefferson has certain beliefs about blacks in the United States, that Thomas Jefferson subscribed to the scientific racial philosophies of the naturalists of Johann Blumenbach and Christoph Meiners to establish the racial codification which the United States would then incorporate into its own legal structures, the definition of Negro, Black, or person of color. Funny enough, next slide, please. We also have one of our greatest abolitionists in U.S. history, which is the great Frederick Douglass, which is the next slide, slide 6, please. Frederick Douglass, after the passing of the 13th Amendment, happened to do a lot of his work in the northern United States. And almost over 2 decades later, he decided I think it was for a speaking engagement, he went down to the South. And when he went to the South, it hit him that slavery didn't end. And he gave a very famous speech, but I thought that it was interesting that he even predicted it himself in the fallacy of emancipation, which he stated they would not call it slavery, but some other name. Slavery has been fruitful in giving herself names, and it will call itself by yet another name. And you and I and all of us better wait and see what form this old monster will assume and what new skin this old snake will come. I thought that was very interesting. He gave an entire speech based on the fallacy of emancipation. And I think it's funny that most of us who go through school and might even learn about Frederick Douglass don't attest to the fact that he himself thought that it was a pipe dream that we were sold at the end of the day. All right. So again, the exception clause states that except as punishment for a crime where a party shall have been duly convicted. All right. We also understand that it was after the 13th Amendment was passed that we entered what's called the Jim Crow era. What we like to say, jumping Jim Crow, came from the concept of the Black Codes. If you could go to slide 8, please. The Black Codes were basically laws that were implemented by states to try to be able to criminalize Black bodies in order to bring them back into the condition of slavery, fully understanding the loophole of the 13th Amendment. So you have to think about this very clearly. Why would a group of people sit down and write a sentence about the abolishment of slavery and very, very specifically go into the construct of abolishing slavery with the exception as punishment for a crime? And it is here that man places himself in the punisher position, right? And what do we as a society do to punish those who have transgressed against others. And while we knew and understood that melanated and Black or African descended bodies did not have the same access to law because of their status as property, during the Black codes, being able to criminalize a Black body allowed the recategorization or the reclassification of property upon a human being. So some of the Black codes that were passed are examples in various states were the legal determinants for racial classification. One of those being blood, and I hope most people are familiar with what the one drop rule is, which stated that if you had at least 1/8 of Negro blood in you, you were Black, right? And also by color of skin, which was by the observer, which gave the power of the power of identification always belonged in the hands of what they considered to be white. Mandatory employment. If you were not working, you were vagrant, and you would be a vagrancy charges would apply to you, right? And you were also assumed to be a farmer, right? So if you weren't working, you could just be arrested, charged, put through the loophole, and re-enter slavery. And this was done for a very long time. It wasn't as grand of a practice as it is today, as we did have many melanated bodies that were incarcerated, committed to chain gangs, and all kinds of labor that was performed in this country. But we also have some other kind of similar concepts that we see today. Cannot assemble. I've been told various times by a police officer to get away from a corner from being assembling, even though I'm on public property. Prohibited from reading and writing. I'm not going to say that that's straight up, but we can say it's structural. Segregation of public facilities. Cannot bear arms. No right to property. And prohibition of intermarriage. If anybody is wants to explore a little further, I would highly suggest you look into the construct of the prohibition of intermarriage, because here you're going to find the codification of scientific racism, the fact that mathematics were performed in order to classify you in your identity and how such identity granted you or did not grant you status and right and access to rights and law. All right, next slide. A century of jumping Jim Crow. From what we know then till now, if we were freed, then why did we need the Civil Rights Act? If we were freed and we were citizens in this country, why did another law need to get passed in order to ensure the rights of a citizen in this country? And why does the fear permeate that if such acts or such other laws weren't to be implemented, then our rights as citizens in this country cannot be affected? So to understanding an entire century in this country's history, up until 1965, that was the year my mother was born, right? That was not that long ago. Did we have laws criminalizing labor, travel, entertainment, food, public spaces and facilities, intermarriage, education, access to health services, sports, and housing? So let's say that everything did end. From 1965 forward, we would hear some right-wing conservative extremists argue that there is no racial inequality, that there is no such thing as racism. But all we have to do is look at the data and the numbers. If we look at how many people, when we talk about the attainment of property, when we talk about educational attainment, when we talk about health disparities, when we talk about mass incarceration, I could go into every field of life in this country, socially speaking, right now, and we will see that melanated bodies, and the more melanated you are, the more you possibly are affected by these conditions. Now, these aren't 100% blanket statements, but I know because I'm in Jersey and I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I've been to every hood that there needs to exist in this country. I know that to be the case for all of us. All right. So I'm at the jail. I'm running a group with our incarcerated community members, and we all came to this conclusion and understanding. And it's crazy to see the realization in some people's faces that this is our condition. I can be bought. I can be sold. I am insured, which is why we get what's called a bond. If I'm committed over time, and say if I get a 20-year sentence, a bond is created upon my body that represents that monetary amount to the state. States create their entire budgets. We're talking the state of Pennsylvania, a $3.5 billion budget to incarcerate bodies, which when we look at the state level, almost half happen to be melanated or Black men. Where do we go wrong in this equation? And I can only argue this for anybody that wants to give the devil's advocate perspective. There's only two possible explanations for why there is a disproportionate effect on black men in our incarceration system. One of them is that black men biologically are inclined to become criminals. And the other one is that this is a racist system. We already disproved point number one. Point number one stated that race that we know as of the year 2000 in the human genome was decoded, and we understood that race was no longer a scientific concept that had been promoted by the scientific community and the top Ivy League institutions in this country to validate the dehumanization of black bodies, or that this is a racist system and that something needs to get done about the codification of how race affects people of color in this country. And I know out of all the codes that I've read that the 13th Amendment is the root code. The 13th Amendment has always been the root because this is where the justification for racism and dehumanization took hold in this country's policies and this legislation and our philosophies and our views about how we should punish those who break the law. So in this group, as we made this realization, we decided we were going to do something about it. I had heard some legislators speaking in front of people saying, listen, if you think that there's a need of the people, come to us and we will sponsor a bill. So I said, all right, let's go to these legislators. So we went to the Legislative Black Caucus of the state of New Jersey, and we wrote a petition, and I had all of our incarcerated community members sign such petition as the disenfranchised. Did so in order to be able to display the fact that, there are many civil and human rights that are lost when you're incarcerated. This is why, and this is, again, I'm going to round all these down to this one point. Dehumanization and the ability to link that to incarceration. Dehumanization, racism, and incarceration coming together, right? How do we get it out? Can we add language to the state constitution, we said. It took about a year of going back and forth, but we finally did it while consulting with the state of Colorado and agreed that we would write an amendment to the Constitution sponsored by Assemblywoman Angela McKnight here in New Jersey and Senator Ronald Rice. ACR and SCR, ACR 145, SCR 96, both are bills that are right now currently on the floor in the state of New Jersey. Asking to add language or create a referendum vote to add language to our Constitution, which would state slavery and involuntary servitude are illegal, including as punishment for a crime where a party had been duly convicted, right? So here we close the loophole, and no access to the status of slavery could exist for any human being in the state of New Jersey. While we can say that every other state has the same capacity, and here's where we bring this to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was always crucial to the abolitionist movement in the United States of America. I mean, even going back to William Penn and his sons, to early Pennsylvania history, to the Quakers and the German immigrants who all stood for the elimination of slavery and the elimination of the practice of slavery. And while William Penn wasn't 100% on board because he himself owned slaves, what I do appreciate about, and you can read this about George Washington, you can read it about Thomas Jefferson, and you can read it about William Penn, which were men who owned slaves, but over time in their writings, you can tell that it impacted them subconsciously because while they were preaching for freedom and equality for all, they themselves held people under bondage. All right. So Pennsylvania while it always had been crucial in the movement, can continue to be crucial till today. Pennsylvania can do the same exact thing that New Jersey did. One, why? Pennsylvania was one of the few first states to jump on board and ratify the 13th Amendment. However, Pennsylvania did not write the amendment into its state constitution. So currently, Pennsylvania's constitution has no mention to the legality or the illegality of slavery. So what I'm saying is the state of Pennsylvania's people can push for a referendum vote to add language to the Pennsylvania Constitution, which would abolish slavery permanently, and join the movement of the rest of other states who are all doing the same thing. If you're interested in this cause, and I'm going to get a little further, please keep eye that Utah and Nebraska are both on their campaign trail right now, and they could appreciate support from every one of us to make sure that the people of those states vote in the affirmative. All right. If we could go to slide number 10. How does it apply to us today? We know that before Obama left office, he banned private prisons, right? He said that we shall no longer be using private institutions to carry out justice in this country because there were many reports showing the injustices and the inhumanity that people go through when they enter these institutions. While President Obama left office, President Donald Trump comes back and comes into office, and he brings back the utilization of private prisons as a means of controlling mass incarceration here in this country. The private prison industry was the biggest lobbying entity to the Trump administration. As soon as Trump comes into office, he pulls out of the Committee to Eradicate Racial Discrimination. As soon as he comes into office, he pulls out of the Human Rights Council and starts mass incarcerating not just adult immigrants crossing the border, as everybody knows is familiar, with children at the border and putting them in cages. Was it a coincidence that he pulled out of the Human Rights Council knowing he was not just about to violate the rights of children according to international law, or human rights for people at the border, for stateless people? Could the same be argued a stateless person who then comes into the United States, as some legislators on the right have been arguing, should automatically become property of the state, right? So here we're talking about propertization of the body, which is why an inmate's jumpsuit says property of on it. So what this has turned into is taking the ability of a human being being monetized, being bonded behind a wall, representing a certain monetary amount, and now that amount being able to be sold to a private institution for the use of private and free labor for most of the parts. Now, we'll say free in some states. We'll say other states will pay full minimum wage to an incarcerated person, however, give most of the money to the institution incarcerating them. And we have yet to find, I found one cooperative that's based out of Puerto Rico, which is an arts cooperative who work and are able to sell their art in the community, and the proceeds of that art goes to their family members. Now, we're going to argue here, should people, no matter what of their incarceration status, if they were to perform labor, how much should they be paid? And I want everybody to take heed and understand that the Department of Labor and laws around labor were born from the 13th Amendment. The reason we have a federal minimum wage is a way of creating the line and delineating what a laborer is versus an involuntary or an indentured servant, right? And here this all leads into what we call convict leasing. And there's a quick timeline here showing from privatization in Louisiana in 1844 to after the Civil War ending and businessmen replacing slave labor. Mind you, a lot of these men got reparations for the loss of their free labor. Yet we will not even go as far as having a serious conversation about reparations for those who perform the labor, right? Arkansas abolishes it as a trustee guard system in 1967. And if you keep going to 1983, Corrections Corporation of America, which has been a very popular name. They're now called Core Civic because they've been under a lot of heat. And you know these companies like to rebrand under the heat. But CCA and Geo Group are two of the biggest private prison corporations in the United States. Does CCA, Core Civic, and Geo Group have business with Pennsylvania? Yes, they do. Do they have it with New Jersey? Yes, they do. The correctional system has been very clever and been able to classify people from whether it be a threat level through the number system that comes in when a person is being brought into the system, depending on what crime was committed and what previous offenses they had on their jacket. With this securitization, I'm going to say it again, securitization of these bodies as numbers, the states enter into contract with these facilities to get labor sometimes, or just for the fact that they know that a private contract was established and that a body represents a monetary amount, right? Now, even if we look at back in the day history, we'll see, and I think it was Tennessee that had the language, that very funny language about the propertization of man. These are conversations that were happening in the 1800s, family, and they are still happening up until 2020 today. The question is, if we have mass incarceration, then what should justice really look like? Now, a lot of us can come together and we can poke holes in the argument and say, look, This is the problem with the system, but not many of us are able to provide a solution. Or not just that, we count on people who have absolutely no education, no knowledge, no experience based and on any of this, trying to make decisions over the bodies of people who go through it every single day. Families are broken. Families are separated. Our communities are plagued with this construct. It is embedded in our culture. It has become our rites of passage from youth to becoming men. It is glorified. And now it is, and as of then, it's always been a legal construct that allows the propertization of the body to occur, that allows profitization of the body to occur. And for some states and for some vicinities or jurisdictions, they solely survive on these monies. So if it wasn't for incarceration, that jurisdiction wouldn't even exist. Is this how we really should represent ourselves to the world? I want to bring another one big point to this, is that when we look at international law, which reflects natural law and all of human rights, slavery is abolished in all of its forms. So as of right now, the United States of America, the state of New Jersey, and the state of Pennsylvania, and all the other states that have not passed, we only have 2 states that have absolute anti-slavery language, which are Rhode Island and Colorado. We are waiting for all the other states to join the movement, because that we know on the federal level, once all the states have done it, 2/3 of the states are needed for a state constitutional convention to vote in the affirmative in order to amend the federal constitution, to repeal and replace. So as many of the states jump on board, inserting anti-slavery language into their state constitution, we can then bring it to a constitutional convention at the federal level and achieve the goal at the federal level, all right? If you could go to slide 12, please. So I shot the number high just looking up, and I'm assuming it was presented already in some of these workshops. I just want to reiterate again for Pennsylvania, 50,000 incarcerated community, and this is state incarceration members in Pennsylvania. Between state and county jails, there's an expense of $3.5 billion. Pennsylvania has a manufacturing fund for inmate and labor programs. Privatization of correctional facilities to community corrections institutions, or what called CCIs. This is where Geo Group and Core Civic have contracts with the state of Pennsylvania. Blacks constitute 11% of the population, yet 37% in county jails and 47% in state prisons. So out of that, that's 23,000 Black community members that are currently incarcerated. And again, the human body represents a monetary amount behind bars. So I would say to a lot of this stuff, because I could go on for days and we could go on for so much of a conversation on this, because it's a lot of history. We're talking 150 years. You can trace the line yourself, but the bottom line to this all, regardless of whether you agree with incarceration and how we should punish people who are incarcerated, and whether you agree mass incarceration should exist, I don't think any human being could stand up with a straight face and say that they agree that slavery should exist in any of its forms. Not any legislator, not any community member, anybody bringing issue to reform. We know that in order to reform, and we're going to go from policing, because we've had some states who entered in contract with private institutions, and the state did not give those private institutions enough bodies to incarcerate. Therefore, the institution sued the state, so the state to compensate over-policed, so they could overcharge and fill those beds so that they wouldn't have to pay the corporation. So policing, prosecution, right? Reentry services, medical assisted therapy, all of these fields that are growing very large are also fields that are growing based on the monetization and the propertization of the body. And again, we need to really visit the question, what should justice look like? If justice in the United States needs slavery in order to exist, I said the United States has a lot of evolving to do. It shouldn't be in our vocabulary at all, especially in writing, especially as a land of the free amongst all the industrialized nations, to be the only one to still commit such practice. Another reminder is how this affects our juvenile population, the understanding of the school to prison pipeline, the psychological conditioning of being behind bars. And if anybody has never seen a juvenile behind a cell, I tell you, it's one of the most disheartening things I've ever seen as a human being on this earth. And for anyone to argue that that is what's going to cause a solution, which when we see all of the data already shows that it does a worse job and makes it worse for these kids when they come home, because now they've integrated into their being. Now they define themselves as an inmate, and it has taken hold and has taken power over any other definition of self, including blackness, including being a human being, including being a man or a woman on this earth or non-gender on this earth. However you decide to declare yourself, that inmate, that prisoner has taken the main construct of our identity in our culture, especially when we're on the streets. These psychological conditionings and these chains need to be broken. I don't care if it's in the law, and I don't care if it's in our education, but we need to stop teaching each other that we come from slavery when we come from the beginning of human history, with empires, with kings and queens, and the births of all the religions and all the forms of education that we have here on this earth. There's no reason we should be anchoring our identity and who we are into the construct of slavery. See, if they wanted to really claim that those days were over, we need to amend our state constitutions. We need to amend the federal constitution. And if we really believe in freedom, completely eliminate any language that deals with slavery. With that being said, if you want to learn more, we are Amend the 13th NJ on Facebook. We have Amend the 13th NJ on Instagram. The Abolish Slavery National Network has a website, which is abolishslavery.us. Abolishslavery.us. And we're hoping to see Pennsylvania at the table. Whatever Pennsylvania would need. As we're campaigning here in New Jersey, we had 12 different organizations from Philadelphia writing to say that they stood with us. So what I communicated to those organizations was that you guys should start your own coalition, your own movement. New Jersey, we'll be right here to support you. You got your sister city, Camden, right next to you in support of you and whatever you need, right? And hopefully it could also be vice versa, because slavery and our societal conditions are irrelevant of political boundaries and identities. You a slave in Philly, you a slave in Camden. It's the same thing. We need to support each other in these movements however we can, and we will be in support of Philadelphia and the rest of Pennsylvania however needed. Again, my name is Dennis Febo. I'm with Wasawara Insights, LLC. If you want to learn more about my entity, wasawarainsights.com, culture and social conscious education. With that said, I love you. I wish you all the best in everything you do. And I will open up the next 15 minutes to Q&A.
Dennis, hi. So fire, absolute fire. I know you couldn't hear me, but I was your amen corner over here. Yes, especially when we talk about the mindset and how we see ourselves, especially as people in color, is so indoctrinated in us that we are the descendants of slaves. We are the descendants of people that were brought over to this country forcefully and illegally, but we don't realize that we are the descendants of those that built empires, and we are the descendants of those that have created all that there is. Even after our ancestors came here, how we still continue to create and build and are still seen as these people who are less than, when if it wasn't for us, there would be no other. So let me just put that out there and say it. And I say that completely unapologetically, by the way, as a woman and as a woman of color. I say that without complete apology. If it was not for us, if it was not for us. And I thank you for your passion, your fire. Whew, I'm in the studio and I'm sweating over here because, sir, I had the opportunity to watch some of your TED Talks. I do my research on people. And your passion, it comes from so deep inside your belly. It comes from inside your soul. You can see it. And I just cannot thank you enough, King. I cannot thank you enough for what you brought to the table. So, as a person who gets so hyped up so easily, this is something that is needed. You are talking to someone who has a history of mass incarceration in her family. Someone who knows, when I get those phone calls, those 15-minute phone calls where my brother or my husband or my loved one is telling me, I just got this new job and I'm mad hype because I'm now making 15 cents. Or the better paying jobs in this place are $1.25. And I'm bringing home this $60 a month just to come home to think that 7.25 is some money. So we have boots on the ground in Philly. Like you said, Camden, not only is Camden my sister city, I've got sisters who live in Camden, blood sisters. So what do we need to do? What can we do? How do we affect this change here locally? And not just affect this change, what do we do to help our young people within the city? Because like you said, they're so ingrained. you know, whether they're suffering from insecurities, food insecurities, housing insecurities, educational disparities, that they're taught because your daddy was in jail, your mama was in jail. This is, like you said, it's that inmate thinking. So I know I just put a bunch of stuff out there. So just talk to me. What do we do to help to be this change agent? First and foremost, to help our folks understand that slavery is still alive and well today within this country, within this construct of what we consider to be freedom.
I think, you know, when I work a lot with I kind of consult a lot with different educational systems. I've been involved for a little bit in Philly's educational system, and what really has always bothered me ever since I was young, and you know, when I got to college is when internet started to like pop off, and I started
Mm-hmm.
reading online. I started learning about being Puerto Rican and understanding the condition of the people of Puerto Rico as a colony and subjugate of the United States of America. But when I learned the truth and I was able to anchor my understanding of being Puerto Rican in the truth, it did something
Mm-hmm.
inside me. As a young person, I felt that much more powerful. I felt like even if I walked in a room and people wanted to give me that look like I was beneath them, that yeah,
Yes.
I love me. I love me so much. I don't care what you think about me. And when we look at youth, all youth are really looking for is for someone to accept them. That because that's where they're at biologically speaking. They're
Right.
developing. They
That validation from community, that validation they might not be getting from home, like you are this beautiful, worthy person.
and now you're
That
growing up
validation.
and you're being
Ha.
told otherwise, and any other conversation directed at you about who you are was negative, right? Then what foundation does any person have to make it equal in this society, right? When it
Mm.
is, and this is why I say us community, and not expecting it from government, not expecting it from educational institutions, that this is when we take our fight to educate and make sure our children are being educated on the truth about who we are. Now, while my program is very successful, still not 100% treated like this is a necessity. Here in New Jersey, they passed the Amistad Act 12 years ago, which mandated Black studies in public education, and I don't see any programs 12 years later. So how are you supposed to know who they are? And it takes us going out and fighting, and we're already catching a lot of them a little too late because they've already ingrained it into their identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one. Two, same thing for our people, and when our leadership and our organizers. This is very it's a Spanish book, but it talks about the colonialized personality disorder. And what does it feel like to be a leader growing up in a society that because you have melanated skin or maybe because you come from a disadvantaged background, that your voice does not matter as much as anybody else's at the table? And I know that to be the truth because I've sat at various tables that when it comes time for our brothers and our sisters, our kings and our queens, to stand up and speak about an injustice, they cower their back.
Hmm.
We need to stand up even stronger than our ancestors did. And we know, we get it. Those of us that did got offed. And this is why I hear a lot in the community. Anytime one of us want to stand up, we get offed. I'm like, but we're getting off for stupider things. And we're offing each
Right. We're
other.
willing. We're willing to get off for needing to make that extra money for. And I'm not generalizing. You know, my people, but we're not willing to say, okay, you know what, this is my voice is going to be heard. And if I don't want to say, because if I'm willing to be that sacrificial lamb, but like I said earlier this morning, our voices are power, you know, and it's the ones, unfortunately, that we still listen to, those voices that still resonate in our ears, you know, those Malcolm X's, the Dr. Kings, the ones that did sacrifice so we can have that seat at the table. What's our level of importance? What is more important to us? Is it our voice? Is it this social construct that we have? You know what, Dennis? Please talk, because I'm on this could be a whole long drawn out conversation.
Well, if we say social constructs, is that you know, we can't necessarily live without them, but for those of us to really understand them as tools, right?
Hmm.
And if a social construct's in front of me, people say it all the time. Yo, what's your nationality? I say I'm Boricua. Oh, why you say that? Because that's Boriquen. My ancestors called it that, right? Oh, are you a brown person? And I stopped to think about that. Am I a brown person? But didn't my ancestors already have a name?
Hmm.
Weren't they proud when they called themselves by that name? Why would I call myself by a name you called me? I didn't call
Hmm.
myself brown. You're classifying me by my skin color. I am infinite beyond my skin color. All that I am does not go around the melanin in my skin. I am spirit. And I will not
Hmm.
allow anyone to classify me on the basis of how my body absorbs sunlight. It does a beautiful thing in the summer, by the way. Beautiful. I love my skin, right? So to say the understanding, the affirmation, and this is important for men in the 13th because people go, what do you mean slavery's still legal? Slavery ended. Okay, then pull up the law where it says that, I tell people. Well, I see it here, the 13th Amendment. What does that say? Accept,
Right. And
right?
that
So
is
now we know we
specifically
can
why I read that. I got a couple of questions for you.
okay.
So, Tamara Brown asked, "What do we do to educate? Oh, what do we do to educate our children to embrace their identity?"
Okay. So I had this kid, we took a group of kids to the movie theaters the other day. And
Mm-hmm.
I bought the food. We watched the movie, but it turned out some of them didn't see each other because it was dark inside of the movie theater. So when we came out to the hallway, these two kids wanted to fight. So me and the other mentors are breaking the kids apart, and I'm like, "Why you want to fight?" I'm like, "Yo, cause he from Wilkinson." And I said, "Where you from?" He said, "I'm from Curry's Woods." Right? So I'm like, "Get your ass in the car, man." I said, throw him in the car. We start talking. I said, "Look, let me ask you something. You told me before you come from Curry's Woods, correct?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Who's John Curry?" And he looked at me
Hmm.
like, and I said, "John Curry, the man that Curry's Woods was named after, was a white farmer in the area." So I said, "You just identified yourself by the name of a man, right, that you didn't know existed, who went to go shoot or fight or kill another person that looked just like you under the name of another man who's probably another white man at this conversation as the name Wilkinson. So I said, you're going to kill your brother in the name of a man that you don't know, in the name of another man you don't know." I said, "Young man,
Hmm.
do me a favor. Out of all the things you can identify with, please tell me what else can you identify with?" And he looked at me dead in my eyes and he said, "I ain't got none, Febo. I ain't got none."
Hmm.
And that to me
Wow.
was, I even knew it in theory, but to put it in practice with him in that situation, he just affirmed to me that if we look at the scope of all the identity labels that we have available to us, like grand, great, wonderful, loving, peaceful, I could keep going into all the adjectives that are positive that when I affirm reverberate through my body, my physiology will respond with the affirmation versus all of the negative adjectives. And now we're going to say nouns. Because if I call myself by noun as the umbrella of the social construct, there is a coding underneath such umbrella. What is that coding? Did we invent that coding, or did we just assume that by calling ourselves by a name or a title, the coding was just going to come automatically with it? Not only that, we reinforce to each other such coding, not understanding where the coding came from and why it was invented. If I knew a man invented this coding in order to subjugate my ancestors, I am not using your labels.
Hmm.
That's it. It's that simple. I have the power to declare who I am to this earth. And whenever I'm able to instill that understanding into a young person, you can see them take off because now they know, they believe, they know they're worthy enough. That's really the big problem with who a lot of us that are failing and not getting what we need is our worthiness. Being a slave or being associated does not bring you to worthiness. Being oppressed, being any of those labels that are either put on us or we put on ourselves does not allow our mind and our physiology to respond in that way. It doesn't mean ignore that these things don't exist. It just means that you don't have to completely identify with it or propagate onto others that they must do so as well. But I think with the freedom of identification and self-knowledge, especially during the identity formative years of these youth, to give them those things that they need to empower themselves with as tools.
Exactly. We need to pour into those vessels. Those vessels are so empty and they're thirsty. That's a good way to be thirsty, and just pour into those vessels. I do have a question. Tasha Carter asked about the name of the book you mentioned earlier.
This was from back in the day book was called Slaves of the State, Black Incarceration from the Chain Gang to the Penitentiary, Slaves of the State, and that was written by Charles Sumner. So that's like to understand sort of like the back in the day of how that looked. I would say for Pennsylvania, I don't know if I mentioned, in order to get your movement going, all you need is a assembly person and a senator. So I would say anybody listening to this who has a close relationship to a legislator or has an organization that has the ability to apply pressure on legislators to sponsor a bill, the moment y'all have a grassroots coalition and Top Roots have written the statement, you are now campaign mode. You will be supported by the Abolish Slavery National Network. We will do anything to guide any of the organizers that are doing this to get them to the point where they need, including promotional materials, access to the website, language for the bill, and any language for resolutions. Because here in New Jersey, we had Jersey City, Atlantic City, Hoboken, Roselle, and Paterson. Each their city councils each make resolutions stating that they stand with adding anti-slavery language to the New Jersey Constitution. Same exact thing can happen in Pennsylvania, just with a little bit of organization and effort.
Right. And once again, I'm just so thankful for your energy and everything that you brought to this table. You just have this amazing fire and this passion. And I just want to reiterate again and again and again, especially when it comes to our young people. This is the time when we can just pour into them. Let's fill their vessels with positivity, not just with positivity, with the necessary education. Because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and we actually went to college together. And we said it's amazing how much of the history was lost from the time we graduated 20 some odd years ago to now, how much history was lost. And then when I hear you speak, I'm wondering, like, if we had these young people, like those two young gentlemen you were mentioning, how much of this history that they don't even realize, how much of this history is lost. Like you said, you are fighting to defend two white men who probably didn't even want you around in the first place, on the basis that you from one corner, he's from another, instead of realizing with that commonality that we have together, this world doesn't care. If you go to jail, they don't care if you from one street to the next street. All they're seeing you is this black man in this cage in this society, and they're going to treat you as such. And they're going to treat you as such. And that's just so powerful. That is so powerful for me. So one of the things I noticed that you worked in New York Department of Education. What kind of things, as far as community empowerment, is even parental empowerment, because that's something that's needed. As parents, as community leaders, what would you suggest that we do to
I
help?
think that for what I saw in Philly, because not only when I was working in Philly, at that time, Philly's Board of Ed got caught in a scandal for stealing the kids' bus money. I don't know if y'all remember that a couple of years ago.
I'm not surprised at
I
that.
was, like, I was just blown away. I was like, really? Like, all the things y'all grabbed, they took their bus money. That even I'm looking at most of the inner city educational systems. I think people need to understand the way the money works. I think if they understood the way the money works and understood that our voices are necessary in order for them to function that way, I think for our communities, most of the time, people are too worried about working and are too busy to like stop and say, hey, let me go to the parent teacher. So everybody knows when you go to the PTA, you're going to find all the parents that you don't even want to be around, right? Everybody talks, right? So it kind of becomes this like little moot group who tries to fight for the parents, with most of the parents disengaged and not wanting to do anything with the school, with principal and administration trying to crack their heads open to figure it out. But I did notice here in New Jersey, a couple of principals that I've met that go out, like when school's out, they go outside. They walk up and down the streets. They say hello to the parents. They're so like, there's one of those popular principals, but you can see the way the staff and the parents engage, right? They feel welcome. I've gone into schools here in Paterson. I went into a school. I go to the front door, desk, and the lady goes, "Can I help you?" This is cool. You know what I mean? Like, I think I would hope that the first person through that door is the most chirpy. I don't care if it's a Becky, like, good morning. I don't care. Get somebody there that's giving positive energy, because at the end of the day, you're not going to put a cranky lady at the door and the first thing these kids are encountering, entering the building is a negative response or being frisked or going through a security thing. The moment you're entering the building, you're setting an energetic tone. And if you're making these kids feel untrusted, you're making them feel unworthy or not wanted, that's how they're going to respond in the classroom. Then you got a bunch of teachers that ain't got nothing to do with the communities that they grew up in. So it becomes this literal moot process, which is why so many of our youth are affected by the system. Parents need to understand the way the money works, because you need to understand, and Philly got a lot of good, powerful, independent schools that do their thing, and that I've seen for myself. As a matter of fact, as out of many of the cities that I've been in. But Philly also is proving it. We can educate our communities outside of these systems. If you haven't been paying attention to Betsy DeVos, the Department of Education, and what they've been trying to do, if you haven't been paying attention to student debt and how they're trying to recategorize and reclassify these debts and the way money's flowing, then you don't understand what you're putting your child into. Because that system is not needed. The reason you're fined for truancy is because your child missed certain days, and there's a monetary amount per day per child. If your child does not go to school, guess who's responsible to pay that bill? You are, as the parent. Really? So if I'm going to be held accountable to have to pay thousands of dollars because my child didn't want to go to your school, then who's going to fine you for not educating our children properly? Who's holding you accountable? And here we're not going to say that the state's going to do it or the government has, because if they were going to do it, they would have done it already. See, then where's the voice going to come from? It's going to come from community. And there's nothing like, bro, get 5 pissed off mothers together. All you need is 5. And you're going to get a reaction. You're going to get a result. Imagine 100, imagine 200, imagine 500, 1,000 people coming together to push for what they know and they believe to be the solution to how our children should be educated.
Right. And then this funnels into what you were mentioning about the school to prison pipeline, because if you think about it on a longer scale, in the greater scale of, we're going to, this is what the 13th Amendment says, and we are literally teaching our children from when they walk into school. I can remember when I was in school, there was no pat downs, there was no machines that we had to walk into. Now, we still had the lady that had the attitude, but that is what it is. But it's like, if we don't realize how this educational system literally does funnel these children, especially these brown and black children, brown and black males, at a disproportionate rate, you are training them to be these people that are included in this 13th Amendment. And what we're not realizing is when they're going into preschool, when they're going into the first, second grade, kindergarten, that change of atmosphere, that change of mentality, that change of thought makes it less and less likely that we need these community correctional centers, these GOs, these other places, that these prison industrial complexes will be closing more than will be building, and that's where it starts. And I'm just so glad that you were able to express that, especially with the passion. When I see passion, I always have to speak on passion. But with that passion and that vigor and that self-love that you continually, that's going to be my new thing, kissing myself. I love me. I'm taking it. I'm stealing it is effectively mine. I thank you for that. I thank you for your energy, Dennis Febo. I just want to thank you so much for being here with us today, and just bringing everything to the table and helping us understand and teaching us in essence how to fill a vessel. So just thank you so much. Everybody stay around. We have coming soon Mr. Donnell Drinks. He will be speaking with us on the upcoming elections, voter suppression, and what we need to do in order to make sure our vote is heard and our vote counts. Once again, Dennis, thank you so much. And really quick, can you give your website address, please? So for those, you folks, I have to, just to watch his TED Talks, can you give your website address for us real quick?
The name is, how I say, Guazabara, Guazabara. If you just Google my name, Dennis Febo, you'll see my company name, Guazabara Insights LLC. That's the website. And you can find it. I have more educational content on YouTube under Guazabara Media. So just Google my name or YouTube my name, you'll see the videos.
Okay, and I definitely encourage everybody who's had the chance to sit here and listen to go to the website, check out the TED Talks. I didn't look at your YouTube page, honestly, but to definitely and learn what we can do and learn what we need to do in order to pour in these communities, understand your rights, He mentioned it at the beginning. If you have not watched it, please watch 13. Please, it will open your eyes. It will give you an insight, especially when it talks about the prison rates over the course of time and how fast the prison rates have grown, especially within I've watched it a couple of times. I see your face, Dennis. I've seen it a couple of times. But in the span of let's say less than 50 years, how much our prison rates have grown within this country. So it goes beyond that traditional chain gang that we think about when we, these are the men and women, y'all, who are literally making masks right now that some of us are wearing. These are men and women who you would be surprised at what we get from this modern day slavery, where they're making sometimes 15, 16 cents an hour. So once again, Dennis, I thank you for coming out. I appreciate you. My king, just thank you so much. I truly appreciate you and your fire and your energy. Please don't ever let that flame go out.
Bless.
So we will be back in momentarily. I'm going to bring Mr. Donnell Drinks out here, and we will talk to him about this upcoming 2020 election, voter suppression. He is the election protection coordinator for the ACLU. But not only that, Mr. Donnell Drinks is a former juvenile lifer. He was convicted and sentenced to life without parole, or as I like to say, death by incarceration as a child. He has since come home. He does amazing work. He's the co-founder of GROWN, which stands for Gaining Respect Over Our Worst Night. As mentioned, he is the election protection coordinator for the ACLU. He is actually here right now wrapping up a Zoom call where he's talking about the importance of voting, knowing what's on the ballot, and voter suppression. So Mr. Drinks will be with us momentarily. So just hang out and we will be right back.
Hello, everybody. My name is Donnell Drinks. I'm the election protection coordinator for the ACLU. I was invited here today to speak on voter suppression. But prior to that, I want to just encourage everyone to register to vote and engage in the process. A person can only be suppressed if they are attempting to engage in the process in the first place. So it's important that the demographic that I come from, which is the formerly incarcerated, knows their rights and are willing and ready to engage in the process. Unfortunately, a lot of them has this misnomer from a lot of the national news of what's going on that is applicable to them. The reality of it is, the moment you step out of prison, your rights are restored, and you are allowed to vote. If you're in prison awaiting trial, you'll have the right to vote. If you're in a halfway house, you have the right to vote. You're on probation or parole, you have the right to vote. If you're incarcerated for misdemeanor, you have the right to vote. These things are important to highlight because so many people don't know what category they fall in. So one of my jobs as the ACLU election protection coordinator was educating people of these various rights and letting them know that their vote would be counted and accounted for on election day by engaging in the process. And if there's any attempt at voter suppression, I advocate them to call 1-866-OUR-VOTE. That's a national line. It's a real-time hotline, which help with any issues that come up, any discrepancies that come up election day or prior to that. It's very, very important that we understand that this marginalized community of formerly incarcerated voices are stifled in so many ways. And one of the most important things that we don't want to constantly happen yet again is for them to be stifled throughout the election process. So it's important. It's very important that we engage them. It's very important that they understand their rights. And we've taken the initiative to even contact those that's currently incarcerated. We know that a lot of the people that's in our communities now network are the men and women they left behind. And so we engage the men and women that are left behind, and we encourage them to encourage those that are eligible to vote. It's important that they have the right information. There's so many uncertainties through this election cycle. There's so much misinformation in this election cycle that it was important that the right information was circulated and being able to disseminate it throughout these respective communities. So we know that the DOC allows those that's incarcerated to get their birth certificate and their social security cards prior to their release. We've been making a concerted effort also to make that include the voter registration card. That eliminates one step that you have to do when you get out, because we know it's over 12,000 people that have been released on this election cycle. Unfortunately, there will be a number of men and women that come out after the October 19th deadline when it's registered to vote, which is the deadline where you should be registered to vote. And they will be caught in a no man's land, so to speak. So it's important that not only that we have sustainability through this election cycle, but throughout, and educate them in the process. We utilize a lot of the inmate organizations to disseminate information, and we did direct mailing to the various jails. But more than anything else, those in our community need to understand that the most important election is the one you engage in. It's not a presidential election. It's a down ticket ballot election. We need to understand that our voices need to be heard. Like everybody, like was previously mentioned, I'm formerly incarcerated. I've been home for 2 years. July 20th, 2018, I was released. And I tell everybody that day I was free, but I wasn't liberated until I engaged in the voter process for the first time. It's important that we educate the men and women that were formerly incarcerated to let their voices be heard. It's very important. As it pertains to voter suppression, we know that comes in many forms. Unfortunately, there's a misnomer that if you don't vote a certain way, that your parole agent would know and you might can get violated. That's not true. Your vote is secret. It's private. You can vote the way you want to vote. There's another misnomer that people think that they may have list. I've heard many different things that, oh, they got a list and they know who's coming to vote, so they might be waiting to lock me up. These are psychological ways of distracting you and discouraging you from voting. There's no mysterious list floating around. There's no police. Actually, it's laws against how close the police can be at the polling places. So all these things that are misnomers and within our community that circulate in the formerly incarcerated community, please engage in the voting process. There's no excuses why you shouldn't engage in the voting process. There's inmate organizations. There's various entities that will help you with the proper information and what you should and shouldn't know about the election process. And one of the things that we've done at the ACLU Pennsylvania is develop a coalition with grassroots organizations. Grassroots organizations are key because a lot of times in our marginalized communities, we feel people come to our communities to pander us for votes every 4 years or every election cycle. And they're not trusted messengers. So our goal and my goal was to engage those that's with boots on the ground, that's doing the work, that can be ambassadors with the message. And our job will be to step back and just funnel them the message. Pandemic altered our approach a little bit, but it also created new opportunities, whether it's food drives, giveaways, to register people to vote, to disseminate information. But it's important that we utilize networks such as grassroots organizations that are out here, and they become our trusted messengers. And so we worked on a train-the-trainer concept, whereas though we make sure you are supplied with all the right information, all the tools to go back to your respective communities and share the information with them. So it's very important that everybody understand that there should be no barriers. I'm not saying that they won't exist, and especially in this day and time where there's so much bullying going on from every level and every different pulpit. But it's important to know that there's people working behind the scenes constantly all the way up until after the election day and what many may think may be election week. But all votes will be counted. Any information that you may need as far as whether you vote through the mail process or in person, I'll just say this: make sure you develop a plan. If you're going to mill through the mailing ballot process, make a plan. Actually sit down and itemize what you have to do, the way you have to do it, and then cast your ballot, cast your vote. If you have to go into the polling place, make a plan. Identify how you're going to go there. Identify your voting status. Identify what polling place is the one you should be going to, just in case they consolidated it. It's important that we. It's important that we it's important that we are prepared, even down to taking your own pen to the polling place. Be be safety minded. Wear your mask. Have your hand sanitizer. Have your own ink pen to sign in. There's nothing that you should not have to concern yourself with on election day but casting your ballot. Like I said, it's very important that we not only get caught up in the national election and presidential election. Um, as a nonpartisan advocate for voting rights, I'll just say make sure you also look at the down ticket ballot. And what that means is other people and other things being voted on the ballot. So don't only stop at the presidential candidates. Go all the way up and down the ballot and make sure you cast a vote on it. Have an opinion on it. Educate yourself prior to it. Discuss it. That's something that we don't do enough. We don't have these discussions amongst ourselves, amongst our friends, amongst our family. We engage in a lot of rhetoric about nonsense, things that aren't too important. These are things that we should make a main staple in our conversation, not only leading up to November 3rd, but after November 3rd. And educate yourself on what's important. And I tell people when I'm encouraging them to vote is to make sure that you understand what's important to you. Make your ballot relative to you. Cast your vote relative to you. What's important to you in your community. I think we do ourselves a disservice when we don't educate ourselves on what's important to us. Um, it's very it's very important that we make sure we make our vote valid and relative to us. There's a lot of questions that I've encountered, and some of them are, do I need ID? Yes, you need ID. Can I vote if I don't have a mask? You should not be turned away for any reason. Polling places should have masks available, but if you don't have one, you still should be allowed to cast your vote. Can I register while I'm incarcerated? Like I said, depending on your status, of I previously mentioned, is if you can register or not. Registering is not casting a vote. So yes, you can be registered while you're incarcerated. Um, if I got fines and costs, can I register to vote? Yes, you can register to vote in the state of Pennsylvania. You are allowed to vote in Pennsylvania, whether you got fines and court costs. These are things that if you have any questions, and once again, I'll say go to acluvotes.com. That will help you with any questions you have leading up to it. And 866 Our Vote Line will help you with any issues or discrepancies that you have leading up to Election Day and on Election Day. These things are highly important. The one other point that I would like to emphasize, and I think that it goes unspoken too often. Those people in our community that have been formerly incarcerated need to understand the power and the numbers that reside within this particular community. We don't exercise, and I say we because I'm not exempt, I'm currently still on parole. We aren't exempt from having concerns that affect our lives. And if we utilize and came out in record numbers, we develop a voting block where not only will candidates respect our community specifically, policymakers will understand our community and will come out to reach our community and come out to ask and what will be important for our community. So, in closing, I want to say to November 3rd, make sure you are voting on that day. You have until October 19th to register to vote. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to all of y'all coming out to the poll. 866 Our Vote will help you with any discrepancies leading up and on Election Day. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Again, my name is Anthony Powell, and I am the Reentry Center Manager with the Institute for Community Justice. As we conclude day 3 of today's summit, we hope that you have been filled with the spirit of justice, reentry, and healthcare that have been provided to you by today's festivities as we come together for social justice in socially distant times. ICJ's Justice, Reentry, and Healthcare Virtual Summit is definitely in full swing, and we've had a great 3 days thus far. Today's theme was Grow, in which we viewed ways that we can grow the strength of our communities, both to defend against the system of mass incarceration as it stands, as well as advocate for desperately needed changes. It was an exciting and informative day, and we encourage you to reach out to us with any questions you may have from the information provided to you by our facilitators today, in addition to any requests for copies of slides or contact information. We invite you to tomorrow's session, in which our theme will be Healthcare as a Right and Not a Privilege. You will have the opportunity to hear from Philadelphia Fight's very own Chief Medical Officer, Stacy Truskin, and Kevin Costello, the Director of Litigation with the Center for Health Law and Policy Innovation with Harvard Law School in the morning. Discussions will be centered on modern, effective healthcare should not be a privilege for the select few who can afford access, but a right protected by law and provided to all. Followed by our afternoon workshop, which is entitled Culture of Health, Healing Ourselves to Heal Our Communities, which will be facilitated by Jackie Johnson, who is the developer and facilitator of Trauma Responsive Art Therapy and founder of Sankofa Healing Studio, with a panel of other individuals facilitated by some of our most passionate mental health and wellness experts, who will explore the effects of trauma and injustice. We do want to remind you that you must register for each session separately when registering. So we invite you to our morning and afternoon session tomorrow. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of our guests that participated in today's session. Thank our partners from the Defenders Association, Kavita Goyal, Kate Parker, Mary DeFusco, who presented a Know Your Rights training, which was an interactive workshop on navigating the current crisis in the criminal justice system. Now more than ever, with uncertain court openings, virtual hearings, and shifting policies and procedures, our communities need to be informed and engaged in the systems to uphold a fair process and just outcomes for all. Hopefully, during this training, you learned about ongoing practices, current challenges, and the power that individuals have within systems. We want to thank Dennis Febo, who presented on the 13th Movement. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime. The the 13th Movement seeks to remove that except and began as movement to amend to state constitution of New Jersey, and just recently incorporated the Abolish Slavery National Network, attempting to unify all states against involuntary servitude by incarceration. We want to thank Donnell Drinks from ACLU, who shared with us information about voting, voter suppression, and voter rights. And let's not forget our Arts as Resistance folks from People Papers Co-op, and of course, Alex Rogers and Connie Greer, who also discussed to grow and strengthen our communities from the youth to elders and everywhere in between. The art today showcase also looked at an impact of mass incarceration on young people, and from the lens of how, when we build ourselves up, we also build up our community. Lastly, we want to we want to thank, or not lastly, but next we want to thank our sponsors, who without them, we would not have been able to launch this. But we not only look at them as our sponsors, but they're great partners who have a true investment and are vested in this work of criminal justice reform. We want to thank first our partners, Philly Cam, who we're powered by today. We want to thank our social media partner, Fifth Influence, our community partners, Philadelphia Federal Credit Union and Indigo, our platinum sponsor, AbbVie, and our presenting sponsor, Seed, which is growing with Cresco Labs. So we want to thank all of our sponsors and all of our partners who have sponsored this event thus far this week. And lastly, we want to thank you, the audience, who spent time today with us to learn more about the work that ICJ is engaged in, and to engage in the conversation with our facilitators for the presentations that were offered today. We also want to invite you to take advantage of the services that we have within ICJ. We are, again, a one-stop shop at ICJ that offers reentry support and healthcare in areas of healthcare and behavioral health, workforce development, of course, our Man Up, mentoring and peer support, and reentry programs that include our anger management, family reunification, parenting classes, digital literacy, GED, and much more around reentry services. You can contact us at 215-525-0460 or call our toll-free number at 1-833-763-4448. Again, we thank you for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp for the kickoff of Day 4, Justice, Reentry, and Healthcare Virtual Summit, coming together for social justice in socially distant times. Thank you for being with us.